Aggregate supply. So similarly to aggregate demand, same kind of idea here as supply and demand. The aggregate supply curve, the thing that's going to be a little bit complicated with the aggregate supply curve here is that we're going to analyze two of the aggregate supply curves. There's actually a third one, the very short run aggregate supply, which we don't analyze in this textbook and is less relevant, so I choose not to cover it as well because I'm following this textbook. But there's two main ones that we look at, which is the long run and the short run aggregate supply. But if we think of the just general short run aggregate supply, just see it as something very similar to the supply curve in the supply and demand framework. Keep that in mind, and then we'll kind of move into it. So the two cases, long run, or I call it LRAS, just as short, or short run, SRAS, or if you just simply see AS, that's the short run aggregate supply curve. Yeah. So, what's the long run aggregate supply curve? The long run aggregate supply curve will represent an output level in the economy that has reached full employment or potential output level, which means that all available resources are fully utilized, but to a normal extent. Okay. Whereas short run aggregate supply is a situation where all factor prices in technology are held fixed. Here we have like even population and other things like that. The big difference between the two, as you'll notice, is that if I just draw them quickly, the SRAS curve will be like this, and the long run aggregate supply curve will be like this. So in the short run, we'll notice that the output level, this represents output or like GDP, this output level can go up if you pay more. And we'll understand how that works in a second. But the whole idea of why LRAS is upward sloping is this idea that we're reaching potential output level. We are at potential output. What does it mean to be at potential output? Well, to be at potential output, it means that we're in a situation where everyone except the natural rate of unemployment, so few people are still unemployed. We're not expecting everyone to be working, so whatever that natural rate is at that given time period, so maybe it's 6%. Well, everyone's working except that 6% that are unemployed, and the people that are working normal work weeks, like 40-hour work weeks or whatever in their industry that they're in. So it is possible to produce an output level that is beyond this, but we'll see that we'll always tend to come back to this potential output level. We'll understand that a little bit more shortly. So this long run aggregate supply curve, a little bit clearer drawn here, is set up this way in the textbook. So I just kind of refer to this as Y star, and this is my quantity of output. I can refer to it as Y, but you could refer to it as natural level of output and quantity of output. And the whole idea here is that at this level of output, we have just normal, natural unemployment. We don't have cyclical unemployment. So why is the long run aggregate supply curve vertical? Well, in the long run, an economy's production of goods and services, its real GDP, depends on its supplies of labor, capital, natural resources, and the available technology used in these, and turn these factors of production into goods and services. As technology becomes better, or an increase in population, capital, or natural resource, over time, LRAS shifts right, explaining the increase in the output and price level over time. So LRAS can shift. But for this class, just keep in mind that we're going to be looking a lot at recessions and booms. And in times of recessions and booms, I don't really expect the level of capital to change. I don't expect machinery to just flee a country. I don't expect natural resources to really change that much in a very short period of time. And the technology, I don't really expect it to change that much. As well, I don't really expect the amount of people that are available to work to change all that much. So For the purpose being of this class, I will treat LRAS as stable. Okay. This textbook, though, sometimes has it shifting right or shifting left. I will say that when we will analyze cases of recessions and different impacts, different changes in macroeconomic equilibrium, which we'll talk about, for simplicity reasons, you could assume, generally speaking, that the long-run average supply curve will not move. Because, like I said, if we're thinking of a short period of time, these things don't typically change. So if you imagine a classroom full of students, and that's the total amount of workers in the economy, if they all have a job, some are making tables, some are making chairs, some are making pens. If they're all working normal work weeks, that's the output level that they'll be producing. Of course, if there's a massive increase in capital, like machinery that they have access to, they'll be able to produce more. If there's a change in technology, they'll be able to produce more. Or if half of them die because of a bomb, or there's a lot of immigrants that come in, grows the population size, or something else that happens, that amount of product that could be produced will change. But generally speaking, if we're going through short-run fluctuations, that level of people is the same, their machines and everything else is the same. So I treat this curve pretty stable. Whereas the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to be this upward sloping curve, which will be allowed to move, because this will move with a change in wages. So this will have a situation that if we think of why it's upward sloping, well, it's that whole same kind of idea as the supply curve. If you increase the price for a product paid, firms will be able to pay overtime and other things like that. So there's going to be an increase in the quantity supplied as we increase the price. What can shift the short-run aggregate supply curve? So I said it's similar to this supply curve in microeconomics and the supply and demand framework. While changes in the cost of production or changes in productivity of the factors of production will shift the supply curve. But changes in productivity can also change the long-run aggregate supply curve. So the one that we're really going to focus on is changes in cost of production. These costs of production could be changes in the price of oil, could be changes in the price of electricity, of just about any factor of production, the good itself that you're using. And then other factors that can exist is changes in the quantity of labor, capital, natural resources. Similar ideas in the other case that if there's a natural disaster and half the crops disappear, well, naturally there's going to be less wine available or less of another product. But the big thing that I want you guys to keep in mind here is that the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift with wages. So if wages go down, if I think about this supply curve, so this is my output, call it Q or Y. Well, for a given price, will I be willing to supply more units or less units? Or for the same quantity as before, do I need to be paying more or less? Well, if my wages I'm paying are less, I'm going to be over here. So the aggregate supply curve will shift right. That is something that you really need to recall. You really need to recall that if wages go down, the aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. If you can recall that, it's going to help you to understand what are the factors that will help us close off a recession or a recessionary output gap if the government does not decide to intervene. Eventually, wages will adjust, bringing us back towards an equilibrium. So this is going to be very important. If there is one thing that you want to highlight from this, it's that idea that if wages go down, the aggregate supply curve will shift right. If wages go up, the aggregate supply curve will shift left. Okay, we're going to move on to the macroeconomic equilibrium, putting both of them together.